Welcome everybody to the mind games of Army Subversion. My name is Poison Ducky and let's get right into this Total War guide. It should be noted that this video will be focused on the Warhammer series of Total War games, but the information in this video can be applied to almost all real-time strategy games in general. Now into the meat and bones of the video. What is the art of Army Subversion? It's really quite simple. Surprise your opponent by making an army that is not built around your faction's strengths. Use the lesser popular units in your roster and gain value from the fact that the enemy will most likely not be prepared for these unit choices. This is especially effective when you expect your opponents to counter-pick your armies. How will we do this per se? Let's look at some examples, as examples are the most effective way of learning this army tactic other than you practicing it yourself. Let's look at the Beastmen. What are they known for? Overwhelming numbers paired with Vanguard and a fast unit roster paired with a strong charge bonus. How will we subvert this army composition? Let's instead bring an elite army that will depend on better unit stats to gain value instead of a roster of units to pressure the back line. Let's see how this could really mess up an Empire unit composition looking to counterbuild the usual Beastmen army composition. Alright, and here we are in our custom battle vacuum. We're going to be using large funds to simulate a quick play, or most tournament scenarios, any sort of like competitive play usually uses large funds. Now let's start with our build in the Beastmen that's going to be rather different from the usual build. Let's bring, I think Morgar the Shadowgave is good in any build, no matter if you are trying to make a Subversion army build or any form of that all. So Morgar the Shadowgave, really good, especially with the Chaos spawns, because it's an unbreakable unit that can deal a lot of backline, and really good just overall in any build. And of course we're going to bring a lore. So lore, I do like Wild here, because Wild is going to be increasing the vigor of your army. And when you have an elite army, the biggest problem when having elite armies is that your powerful units get stuck on chaff and they get tired, and when the time they make it to the few elite units on the enemy side, they're too tired and will get destroyed. That's where Bestial Surge comes in. 9% vigor, 18% charge bonus for 9 seconds. That is a big boon. So take the cheap spells, take only these three, especially in the Empire matchup. Let's only bring some cheap spells, spam it out, increase the vigor of your army. Let's get into the biggest part of why you want to subvert your army. Let's go here. Bestigor Herd. 4 units of Bestigor. I'll bring 5. This is unheard of in most matchups, because everyone expects the Beastmen to either push up very aggressively with high numbers, Vanguard, do some flanking with Centigors, use Razorgore herds to try to do sideline, backline pressure, or break through the front line with Razorgore chariots. Now, Bestigor herds have armor. They don't have shields, but they have armor, and that makes a really big difference against the Empire matchup. Of course, with any unit of heavily armored, you need to have some anti-large, because you don't have anti-large really in the Bestigor herd. And that's why we bring Minotaurs with great weapons. To bring at least 2 of these, probably bring the Butchers of Kalkengard, and that's a really simple army. Overall, I'll probably take out 2 units of Bestigor herd, maybe add in 2 Spearmen units, to try and make it so that we don't get completely overwhelmed by cavalry play. Maybe we have 400 and get an Ungor herd just to shore up any line. So we still have a few numbers, a little bit of cheap infantry, but we have a very strong core with a very powerful Minotaur line. Now let's see why this build would be very effective against Empire. If I was an Empire player, or at least a normal Empire player, and building to counter a normal Beastman build, which is going to be heavy numbers, very low armor, but knowing the enemy is extremely fast, I would probably go with something like Volkmar the Grim, Karl Franz, or even Boris Todbringer. Balthazar Gelt and the Archlector would probably not be the best choices, and the General Empire is just nothing too special, especially General Lords are just not good unless you're going for a very, very wide army. So let's get Boris Todbringer here, because Volkmar the Grim may buff your infantry, but when you're fighting a Beastmen army, you really aren't going to be focusing on your infantry in this kind of fight. So I'm going to get Boris Todbringer, going to bring him on the Imperial Falcon, and get the, where is it? The Middenland Runefang. So he's going to have regeneration and be able to last a long time, and he's going to be sort of like a goon. Very powerful against Kazarak, very powerful against Morgur, very powerful against Malagor. Any lord the Beastmen have, Boris Todbringer should be able to goon squad relatively well. But that's why on my roster, I'm going to be bringing Minotaurs. So we have our Lord chosen, and let's get a lore. Lore, usually you expect lots of cheap infantry, so what I choose is maybe a Bright Wizard. Let's put him on a Pegasus so that he can't get taken out. Actually, you know, Pegasus should do well here. And take out all these other unnecessary spells so we can save some money. You only need Fireball to spam at units, so Lords, Casters, bring the Cascading Fire Cloak to just increase melee defense and armor piercing values on Boris Todbringer or any unit that has very high armor piercing, and the Burning Head is a centerpiece of destroying any low armor units that the Beastmen are quite fond of. Now, Frontline. We know that the normal Beastmen army is very, very efficient at taking out swordsmen and spearmen. So how are we going to counteract this? Let's bring flagellants, right? So they're going to bring gore herds, ungore herds. Flagellants are going to be unbreakable. They will die. Here's the difference. While they will die, they'll do a decent amount of damage, and they will actually... Let's bring some spears here. A front line with the Sigmar Sons being the centerpiece with flagellants on each flank is going to be quite effective, as none of this front line will break and will hold on as you get value out of crossbowmen. Crossbowmen are a very powerful unit in the Beastmen matchup because Beastmen don't have armor, and armor-piercing projectiles are rarely needed. And if this was one patch later, the crossbowmen would probably be replaced by archers or some sort of huntsman. So keep that in mind as the new DLC is coming out. And we have a good amount of funds left, and we should bring the Altdorf Griffites, a centerpiece in almost any Empire matchup. You pretty much bring them in. Just, you know that Minotaurs are a powerful force on the Beastmen roster, Centaurs, anything like that. Royal Altdorf Griffites will get the job done. And with the remaining funds we have left, we have plenty of units here. Maybe we should get some halberds to shore up the front lines, make sure no Minotaur or backline pressure. So we've got a front line of 5 units. We're going to have the centerpiece of, right here, we're going to have 2 spears on each flank, and then we have our back line of crossbowmen with 2 halberds shearing up the back line, with the Altdorf Griffites plugging any holes required for the backline pressure or fast pressure from Centaurs. Now, how will this match up? My front line of Bestigors will take almost no damage from flagellants whatsoever. The high armor of the Bestigors will negate most of the damage of the crossbowmen, and the high pressure of the 2 Minotaurs with great weapons, along with the Butchers of Kalkengard, will be able to push through and kill most units, like all units on the Empire roster so far. And remember, the Lore of Fire will not be effective against the Bestigor units, and these spearmen will probably match up with the enemy spearmen, and which will be a draw at best. And the Ungor herd over here just shoring up any front line, being a meat shield for anything such as the halberds. And the Minotaurs with great weapons with their anti-large prowess will 2 units could easily deal with the Royal Altdorf Griffites. Now, the one weakness of this build is that even though they do bring a lot of crossbowmen, Minotaurs will never really have great armor values at 35, 35, and 45. They'll take a beating, so you have to keep the Minotaurs back. There's a lot of matchup knowledge needed when trying to do a army subversion or counter build, supposedly. So remember, you can choose to send the Butchers of Kalkengard up front. That's okay. They have silver shields. But the Minotaurs with great weapons need to stand back, wait for the Altdorf Dwarf Griffites to make their move and then punish them as they try to cycle charge or try to push into your infantry line. And that's going to be the Beastmen section of this Subversion guide. Okay, let's look at the second example of an army subversion, but this time on the Lizardmen side, because I know Lizardmen are very popular, and into against the High Elves, one of the token good guys, right, of the Warhammer universe, except High Elves are so arrogant. But we're going to use large funds again. Make sure that to always keep that on when building your custom battles. And let's use Tenuin as our leader. I'm going to put him on a horned one so he has high speed, can move around the battlefield, and support with his magic abilities. Mainly Wisian's Wild Form, Flock of Doom, and Transformation of Caden. Now, Caden's going to be backline pressure. Flock of Doom punishes any sorts of blobs of infantry. And Wisian's Wild Form is really useful, specifically when buffing skinks, and more specifically, red-crested skinks. Because skinks don't have any armor, and the weapon damage is going to increase that armor piercing values on these skinks quite well, 25%. Very useful specifically on skinks. Not nearly as useful on Saurus Warriors, you would think. But we haven't spent that much money, and we're going to get a skink chief on a Pterodon rider, just in case your opponent on the High Elf sides goes some form of Phoenix or Great Eagle, which is pretty rare, or dragons, as this will be able to kite them, apply poison, and annoy them for the entirety of the match, and be the thorn that really annoys and may tilt the white High Elf player into like the edge of the map. It's very interesting when you see a dragon chase a skink chief on a Pterodon all the way on the other side of the map while the rest of your army converges on his army. Now, what kind of build do we want to go heading into the High Elves while still subverting your army and make sure that his unit choices will not be as nearly as effective against your units? Saurus Warriors with shields, 5 of those. Now, I'm going to be following tournament standards here. You can only bring 5 maximum units, so this can be useful in a tournament or competitive setting, specifically following the King's Cup rules. Go 3 Red Crescent Skinks, one of them being the Regiment of Renown right here. Let's put them in here so that we have lots of infantry. We're going to put them in the back line. Make sure the Saurus Warriors take any sort of projectile fire. And we're going to go Skinky Cohorts galore. That's a lot of infantry to deal with. That's a lot of shields to stop them. And we're going to go with a lot of Feral Cold One Riders here. Now we're going to have 200 extra. Let's take some skinks here, add 2 with Javelin. And we have a very standard build right here for stopping High Elf pressure. If you see the theme of this, it's infantry overwhelming with some backline Feral Cold Ones. If you notice, there is no Carnosaurs, no Ancient Salamanders, no Bastillodons, no the Engine of the Gods, nothing, no Regiment of Renown large units, no flying units with the exception of these Skink Chief, and no real powerhouse cavalry. This is going to be purely on the suspect that your opponent's going to build against any form of large unit. Now let's see a High Elf build that would be built against this sort of, I would say, play style by the Lizardmen. Now let's get a Lariel, and she's probably going to be on the Pigeon if you're going to be fighting against her, and she's going to have all these amazing spells. Arcane Unforging to stop you. Tempest is not necessary. Shield of Thorns, very powerful. Earth Blood. Frost Protection. Banishment is unnecessary here. Any items? Star of Avalorn. Staff of Avalorn. Shieldstone of Isha. That's not necessary. So lots of healing potential and a lot of sniping for against Tenuin in general. So with that chosen, you really don't need any more leadership, especially with Alariel being such a powerhouse in the Lord sections of the High Elf roster. So let's go into our front line. Now we're going to be expecting Saurus Warriors here, but Spearmen are almost a part of any front line of High Elves, because even though Saurus Warriors will churn through Spearmen, it will take a while. But just to shore up the back line, 2 units of White Lions of Thrace should do well in this matchup and finally finish off the Saurus. But here's the problem. I'm going to lots of players will go Sisters of Avalorn. 3 units of Sisters of Avalorn are pretty mainstay in this matchup. Why? Because they deal so much damage against any large unit, such as Carnosaurs, Bastillodons, Stegodons, you name it. These are almost hard counters to those units as long as they have backline protection. So 5 units of Spearmen, 2 units of White Lions of Thrace, and we have a pretty decent army going for us. A very common choice, Fireborn. Fireborn are really good, especially getting into the back line. They have anti-large bonus, charging into any sort of skink or Saurus pressure, almost infinite value, as long as you get the charge bonus off, and we've got a very decent build here. Now, if you want, you can get some Lothran Seaguard, maybe 1 unit of Lothran Seaguard because they can defend themselves and do some decent missile pressure. Or if you really want, you can take out the White Lions, get in a Phoenix Guard, and get in maybe the Puremain Company. I would probably, instead of getting the Puremain Company, I would most likely just keep at least 1 White Lion unit, because White Lions will just... They can clean up against those Saurus. And this is a really standard set build against in a Lizard matchup. Let's see, we have a little bit more funds. How could we upgrade our units? Fireborn, of course, so fantastic. Phoenix Guard can really hold the line just in case. With 200 funds, I think it wouldn't be out of the park to bring Lothran Seaguard. Instead, take out 1 Spearman, bring in another Lothran Seaguard, bring them with shield so that they have increased melee defense, and then add some chevrons to the spears, just in case some large units. So you have 3 units of archers that cannot defend themselves, but you have spearmen for that. 2 units of archers that can defend themselves in this case, so it would be really useful, so you don't have to babysit them nearly as much. The Phoenix Guard to deal with any large units like a Bastillodon, the Fireborn to deal with any fast large units like Horned Ones, Cold One Spear Riders, and the Sisters of Avalorn will deal a really high amount of damage to the infantry, or not just infantry, but mostly the large units on the enemy side. Now, balance of power here actually heavily in showing in the high elf favor, but I think this build, I would be very happy with sending this build against the high elf matchup, because just no large units, a little too much not enough prioritization for the opponent, so he's not going to know which area to shoot. There's going to be hordes and hordes of Saurus along with skinks, some with red crested skinks. If your opponent knows what they're doing, they're going to fire at the red crested as they don't have shields. And this is a very nice backline pressure. This is almost using a Beastmen roster unit. Like, replace these with Razorgore Herd or Centaurs, and replace these with Ungors, and you've practically got a Beastmen roster build right here. So remember, like, I think this is going to be a very powerful matchup in this kind of, like, fight. And this build will really throw your opponent off. And now you've heard me talk and make these builds, but I really should show you an actual replay example. And that's going to be the next part of this video. So stay tuned for that. This is going to be part of the actual replay part of this little tutorial, and I'm going to be bringing the dwarves in against the Tomb Kings. Now, what are you going to see instantly right off the bat? Nothing really out of the ordinary in terms of frontline dwarf warriors, one of them being great weapons, just in case they brought a little too many Tomb Guard, but a fragile front line. But here comes the special part. It's not 1 unit of Slayers, not 2 units of Slayers, one of being the Dragonback Slayers, not 3 units of Slayers, not 4 units of Slayers, but 5 units of Slayers. That's not something you see every day in a dwarf sort of matchup. Now, why do you want to do this? Everyone usually expects the Thunderer play in some form of dwarven matchup, especially against the Tomb Kings, and I think my opponent actually built against this. I'm going to bring a bunch of Quarrelers, 3 actually. So 3 Quarrelers, 1 Trollhammer Torpedo Iron Drake, so we've got heavy armor. Make sure we don't take too much damage from projectiles in these units, as when you bring this kind of subversion, you're still going to have weaknesses. And in this case, skeleton archers are going to be the largest weakness for this kind of army composition, as Slayers don't have any armor to stop projectiles, and they're going to take a beating if they get shot. 2 lords, 1 being the Rune Lord and 1 being a Rune Smith. Gotta bring those Wrath and Ruined runes, because reducing speed, and in the next patch when it reduces 70 5% speed, including the charge bonus, that will be devastating. Now, what kind of build did my opponent bring into this battle? He brought actually archers, which is not, it's more surprising than not, because archers against dwarves are usually that effective unless you bring the regiment around. So really interesting pick there, and that's actually going to be really dangerous against my slayers. And he's going to have a front line of mixed Tomb Guard, Nekahara warriors, and skeleton warriors, really just to hold the line. But here comes the special part. While he does have Archon the Black and a Necrotect as his leadership, he has 2 Vanguard deployed Tomb Scorpions in the back of the map. Now, I did not suspect this whatsoever. It completely took me by surprise. I was like, wow, that's a really ballsy play to have 2 Scorpions out on the edges of the map. He's going to have 2 Carrion to disrupt any sort of projectile play that I have, but you'll find I don't have that much projectiles to lose. And let's get into this replay to show how this army's Subversion will actually come out on top. A little spoiler there, but it will come out on top. Now, frontline engagement, he does have a wider front line, so it's going to be a little dangerous here. And he's going to be firing into the first units that walk up. And if you realize here, I'm going to move my Slayers back. You can see my movement commands. Now I'm going to make my mini map a little bit smaller. I'm making sure the Slayers are outside of archer range while I push my Quarrelers forward and shoot these skeletons. Now, the Quarrelers, really good matchup. They have bronze shields and armor. They will not take damage from the skeleton archers whatsoever. Make sure all my Slayers hold back. And I was a little surprised. I was expecting a not a Necrosphinx, a Kemrian War Sphinx, at least one. I was expecting some chariots. I was a little confused. I was like, I know my enemy should have more here. Where's the Ushabti? Where's the Tomb Scorpions? Yeah, the Tomb Scorpions are right over there. Now, a little negligence on my part, as I don't actually realize this until a little too late, as I'm focusing very heavily on the skirmish part of this combat. Now, I'm going to have my Dwarf Warriors finally engage the skeletons. As my line is not as wide, he's going to have some more flank pressure in terms of infantry, but Skeleton Warriors are never really that dangerous. Now, my Quarrelers, look at this. Focus, remember to focus fire what projectiles that you have. Only 3 units of Quarrelers. I've already taken out 1 entire unit of Skeleton Archers, and I'm going to go periodically, 1 by 1, with my units. Now, some Carrion are going to get into the back line. I'm going to use my Dragonback Slayers. They will make very quick work of them as he tries to pressure my Iron Drakes, but Iron Drakes have very high armor. It's going to take a while, if like a very long time, for them to do really any sort of damage to Iron Drakes with torpedoes. Now, back with the Quarreler play, I am still focusing down those archers, and he has not had the opportunity to fire into Slayers until now. Now, Fate of Buna going on to my Quarrelers. Interesting pick, but I guess they were dealing a lot of damage. And until now, my front line is starting to buckle, and he does get some fire into the Slayers, which is a terrible trade on my part. But that's not going to last long. Quarrelers will take down these skeletons with no problem. And since I had a plethora of Slayers, I'm actually going to use the Slayers on the right side to flank. Yes, flanking Slayers. Now, my opponent finally gets in the Tomb Scorpions and finally get into the battle. It took them a while. They were Vanguard deployment really deep, and he's going to summon some Ushabti to make it into my Iron Drakes. That's okay. 1 unit of Iron Drakes holding down a Tomb Scorpion, Carrion, and the summon unit of Ushabti. It's not great value trade-wise, but it's something that I can deal with, and I was prepared to lose value on my ranged units. Now, it took me by surprise, but 1 Scorpion makes it into the back line of my Quarrelers, and I'm going to immediately send my Giant Slayers. I have 2 units of Giant Slayers and 3 units of normal Slayers, so this is no real problem. I'm going to use a rune. Here it is. Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Reduce the speed. Make sure he can't get out of these Slayers, and he is going to be in there for a pickle. You do not want to be fighting Slayers as a Scorpion. No matter how the animations of the Tomb Scorpion, probably top tier, best in the game, as you can get the least amount of hits into him, but he's slowed. The Slayers are dealing the damage required. It's a lot of power that the Scorpion is not going to really be able to deal with. Some backline pressure with Archon the Black, it's going to be inevitable. Archon the Black on a Chariot, it's quite hard. It's very well known that Dwarves struggle on the Chariot matchup, and the balance of power is straight in the center. I'm going into a little caster mode, aren't I? showing this replay, but it's very fun. Coming up with this build of Slayers, it may not be the like, oh god, this guy's revolutionary. I'm not stating I'm revolutionary coming up with this guide, but it's always fun to feel like, man, I really counterpicked this kind of army composition. Slayers coming in, they'll make short work of Ark in the Black unless he tries to get out. He's being held down. I did use another rune of Wrath of Ruin. Make sure he can't get out of there without taking a beating. And these Tomb Scorpions are being really effective at actually pressuring my Troll Hammers. My Troll Hammers have gotten 2 kills. Now, do keep a note, they've done a lot of HP damage. They're not really known for kill counts, and they're very low. 6 models left, but they're still going. And it's just a roundabout chase of Slayers chasing his large units, and his large units not being able to really get into my Quarrelers without taking heavy losses. Yes, he's trading into the Quarrelers, making sure, like with my Tomb Scorpion, but just too many Slayers stopping them from getting any real damage done. And if you remember, I took out all skeleton archers that my opponent had. There are none remaining at this point. They've all crumbled away, and that's the biggest threat to the Slayers, as the Slayers will have no real problem chopping through the large units left on the Tomb King roster. Now let's speed it up because we know the archers can't take out my Slayers. My Slayers are just going to be on a roundabout, and I'm just going to slow them down, keep on using my runes, slow them down, and eventually whittle down the Scorpions as this one falls. Ark in the Black is too low. He took a torpedo shot, believe it or not, and that's like the end of him. The Necrotech, being infantry, will take a while to take down, but overall pretty happy with this. There's only 1 Tomb Scorpion left, and I have a huge force of Slayers and a summoned unit, of course, going down with the Tomb Blade of Arkan, and that is going to be a GG, as I still have some Quarrelers left, believe it or not. All 3 of them are still alive, just very low on health. And that's going to be a rout, and the Tomb Kings are going to be defeated by the Slayer force. As mine will be playing as Carrick. What was Carrick Kadrin? Not Carrick Kadrin. But the Slayer-focused dwarf subfaction. Let's see our unit efficiency here. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doors, 99, 81, 61, 26, 29 on the Dragonback. But the Dragonback were running around. Nappy nipples. All right, guys, don't. This is a safe channel. Don't worry about it. And look at this. It's just, he deployed pretty large number, actually, surprisingly. I deployed a moderate amount. And Slayers just really paid for themselves. And the Quarrelers. Quarrelers dealing with his archers, making sure they don't get value off the Slayers. I did lose 1 Slayer unit, which is very crucial. And these Slayers just chasing Scorpions around the entire map, including Arkan. It's a lot of pressure to deal with. You have to micro a lot to deal with this kind of units. And I'm pretty happy with this. Okay guys, I hope you learned something. The art of army subversion. Go out there and counterpick your opponent's counterpicks. And you never know. You might find an opponent that may counterpick your army's counterpick. So leave a like and subscribe if you want more, and who knows, if this gets enough traction, I might make more strategy videos or unit guides. So, catch you guys later.